Hello humans. Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. This is an Imperial trick knife. These were relatively common. They were sold under a bunch of different names and a bunch of different people made this idea or a similar idea of trick knife throughout sort of the late 30s all the way into the 70s. There's even a few very late examples in the 80s and 90s. But Imperial specifically, so this is Imperial Ireland. Imperial Ireland first filed a patent for this in 1939. It was eventually granted in 1942. The patent has nothing to do with the trick mechanism of this. It's a manufacturing patent having to do with the way that they fit the scales, and just generally constructed the knife. But that is kind of the earliest example of these I could see, and I know that they were manufacturing them into the 70s. And they stopped at some point during the 70s as far as I can tell, just from examples I have seen. I don't have a particularly great history on the Imperial Knife Company of Ireland. I know eventually they became part of Schrade, but somebody in the comments might have more information than I do. This is kind of unique. It's a locking slip joint knife that only locks in the closed position. It is a very typical inexpensive slip joint. It doesn't have an actual dedicated half stop. It just has a high point right there. However, at the fully closed position, it holds itself open like this, and you actually have to press down on the spine of the blade to close the knife, whilst pointing the tip downwards in order to get it to lock in the closed position. Once it's in this closed position, there's actually nothing you can do to open the knife. What you have to do instead is tip up, press, and then it'll pop open enough for you to be able to grab the knife and open it fully. It's a very thin knife. It's very much just a little pen knife that you might carry in your jacket pocket if you need to cut the twine off of a package or separate your links of sausage or whatever it is that you happen to do during the day. This is a very, very light use EDC knife, probably targeting more gentlemanly people, not so much farmers or people who are using their knives very regularly throughout the time period. Now, fundamentally, this would just be another inexpensive, not all that interesting slip joint knife from this time period if it wasn't for the trick mechanism. And the trick mechanism itself is fairly simple. Inside, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that. Inside, there is a free-floating brass bar in a little groove. So the groove runs this way here. When you close the knife, in the right orientation, the little brass rod slips into this hook right here and prevents the knife from being opened. Because the hook actually curls over a little bit, the low point isn't towards the tip, you have to press whilst the blade is being held downwards in order to disengage it, which is why you have to do it holding it up with the tip downwards in order to lock it, and the tip upwards in order to unlock it. Because you have to get it past the end of that hook in either case, right? The slip joint mechanism itself is very, very stiff, and you don't have any type of nail nick or long pull or anything to help you open it, so it can actually be a bit of a difficult knife to open and manipulate. But the lock mechanism itself, the trick mechanism, does still work quite well despite its age. I don't know exactly how old this particular example is. Based off the stamp, I think it's from the later run, maybe 50s or early 60s, but that is just kind of my guesstimate. I'm not entirely sure when this was made. This is a very, very plain version. This one here would have been sold as a trick knife. These were also often sold as advertising knives because the scales are very, very easy to put stamps on, logos, whatever you happen to need, which, makes them appealing for what they do, which is Imperial made a lot of advertising knives. They made a lot of purpose-built knives for advertising, and these knives have to be very inexpensive, unique enough to be worth holding, and good enough to not get thrown out immediately. That's kind of their only criteria. It's the same thing as advertising pens nowadays. And this kind of fits that. You have a very short blade. I think it's 2¼ inches. Where did my ruler go? That's actually a good question. I've lost my ruler. Oh, there it is. I need this for the next part anyways. So I think the actual blade itself is quite short, not even 2. 1 3/4 inch edge, and then the full length of the blade is 2 1/8, but that includes that ricasso and lock area kind of a deal. In terms of blade thickness, it's going to be a very thin blade just because it's what it's designed to be, right? Like, this is a slicing knife. It's very light use, very whatever you need to do in a day. But let's see, nonetheless, what your maximum thickness is. 65 thousandths. Yeah, that tracks. Like, this is... Is it shocking to hear that the novelty knife from the 50s isn't necessarily designed for hard use? If that is shocking to hear, reevaluate. Yeah, it's a light use knife. It's a very simple knife, but it is kind of a neat trick. And if you hand it to somebody who doesn't know how it works, they will spend a couple of minutes trying to figure it out, right? Being said, it is stupid stiff. Yeah, it's very simple. There's not all that much to say about it. As far as slip joints go, you have better modern examples. The steel isn't very good because it's an old steel and technology's moved a long ways, and even at the time that this was originally made, it was designed to be an inexpensive object. This type of thing has always existed. This is your $5 knife at the checkout of your hunting supply store, right? Like, and that's fine. That needs to be fine. This is a example of its piece and an example of its design. That's what it's supposed to be. As far as modern collector values, it's a neat thing to have. It's definitely kind of weird with the locking mechanism, and it's fun to hand to people who might even be knife people and just not familiar with it. You can hand this to them and be like, here, can you open it, you know, play it. It makes a good conversation piece, it makes a good show and tell piece, and that does hold value to some people. But I paid $12 for this, and I wouldn't pay any more than that. I probably would have been happier if I had only paid $10. It works, it's sharp, it slices. I mean, you can sharpen it yourself with pretty much anything. The lock mechanism works. It's a little rattly, but it's really not too bad. It's fairly comfortable. You actually get, again, for such a short blade, you get a pretty full handle. It doesn't matter all that much because of how light use this object is, but, you know, it's comfortable to use. It's a little slick because it's just bent stainless steel as the handle, but you know, if you're actually intending to use something like this, it's not an uncomfortable object by any means. It's just very, very basic. What you see right now is what you are getting, with a neat little trick mechanism in there that you have to think about a little. It is very stiff. I keep repeating that, and it remains true. It is just a very, very stiff object, but there's not all that much you can do about that. Yeah. Kind of fun to use, kind of fun to own. If you see one inexpensive, I'd pick it up personally, just because it is a neat thing to have in a collection, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to have more than one unless they had different mechanisms. I know Imperial specifically had a couple of different mechanisms that they used, and other companies made their own versions of the trick knife, some of which had, you know, scale releases or other neat odds and ends that you had to do. So it's worth picking up. It's definitely a fun thing to have, but there's nothing all that special about it. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.